What up, YouTube? Big Lou tapping back in. You already know what it do. Big Lou, NMCR2, baby. As always, first time you coming to the channel, it'd be highly appreciated if you sub, like, and share the channel with your family, friends, peoples, gente, folks, uh, associates, socios, camaradas, comrades, buddies, pals, amigos, and panas. Be sure to leave a comment, and I respond back to all the comments. Again, I'm pushing the profiles, and this time it's pro wrestling, and we're gonna kick it off with the guy named by the name of Randall Mario Poffo. And he's born on November 15th, 1952. And unfortunately, he passed away way too soon on May 20th, 2011. If you guys don't know who that is, that's none other than the Macho Man Randy Savage. Oh, yeah. Snap into a Slim Jim. Anyways, he's an American professional wrestler, best known for his time at WWF, which is now known as WWE, and WCW, right? He's born in Columbus, Ohio, and he died in Seminole, Florida. Cause of death was a heart attack brought on by atherosclerosis. Miss Elizabeth was not only his manager, she was actually his wife as well. And they were married from 84 to 92. And then he was married again with Lynn Payne in 2010. His father was a legendary wrestling promoter, Angelo Poffo, and his brother was Lanny Poffo, a.k.a. Leaping Lanny, a.k.a. The Genius. Some of his ring names that he was known by was Randy Poffo, Randy Savage, The Spider, Big Gino, Mr. Madness, The Destroyer, The Executioner, and Bonesaw, which I remember Bonesaw was in WCW, I think. He was billed at 6'2", 237 pounds, and he was billed from Sarasota, Florida. And he's trained by his dad, Angelo Poffo. He debuted in 1973, and he retired December 5th, 2004. Excuse me. Savage was described by ESPN's Bill Simmons as one of the greatest pro wrestlers who ever lived, a statement echoed by multiple industry performers. And I've heard that by many people that he was one of the best workers as far as not so much in ring all the time, but the way he the gimmick, the way he took the gimmick, you know what I'm saying? He was recognizable by wrestling fans for his distinctively flamboyant ring attire, intensity exhibited in and out of the ring, use of the finale from Pomp and Circumstance March #1 by Elgar, his entrance music and signature catchphrase, "Ooh, yeah!" Right? For most of his tenures in WWF and WCW, Savage was managed by his real-life wife, Miss Elizabeth Hewlett. Savage had 6 world championship reigns during his 32-year span, including 2 as WWF World Heavyweight Champion and 4 as WWF, and 4 as WCW World Heavyweight Champion. As WWF Champion, he held similar drawing power as Hulk Hogan. A one-time WWF Intercontinental Champion, he was named by WWE as the greatest title holder of all time and credited for bringing a higher level of credibility to the title through his amazing in-ring performance. Savage was the 87 WWF King of the Ring and the 1995 WCW World War III winner. He headlined many pay-per-view events throughout his career, including WrestleMania's, I don't even know how to count those. 3 times at WrestleMania, right? Being part of a double main event at WrestleMania V111. 2 of the first 5 SummerSlam shows in 1995 Starrcade. He was inducted into the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame upon its inception in '96 with a WWE Hall of Fame induction following 2015. Um, Randy Poffo was born, like I said, November 15th, 52, in Columbus, Ohio, the eldest son of Judy uh, and Angelo Poffo. His father was Italian American, his mother was Jewish. Poffo was raised Catholic. Angelo was a well known wrestler in the 50s and 60s who was featured in Ripley's Believe It or Not for his ability to do sit ups for hours on end. His younger brother is a professional wrestler, like I mentioned, Lanny Poffo. He lived in Zanesville, Ohio, where he attended Grover Cleveland Middle School. He graduated from Downers Grove North High School in Chicago suburb of Downers Grove. Poffo later moved to Staten Island, New York, where before moving to Lexington, Kentucky, where he lived for many years. A lot of people don't know this, but I'm gonna do a video along with. It's gonna be majority about wrestlers that were former NFL players, and he's gonna be as of right now the only that I know of wrestler that was a professional baseball player. He signed with the Cardinals, St. Louis Cardinals organization as a catcher out of high school. He was placed in the minor leagues to develop, where he mostly played as an outfielder. In the Cardinals and Cincinnati Reds farm system, Savage was 18 when he began playing minor league baseball. One of his teammates on the '71 Gulf Coast League Cardinals was Larry Herndon, who was also his roommate. Savage would swing a bat into a hanging car tire to strengthen his hands and utilize his legs during swings. The technique was so effective that Herndon used it during his own career as a baseball coach. Savage injured his natural right hand throwing shoulder after a collision at home plate, and he learned to throw with his left arm instead. Savage's last season was in '74 when he played for the Tampa Tarpons. He played 289 games in 4 minor league seasons, batting .254 with 16 home runs and 129 RBIs. His early career, 73 to 85. Savage broke into the wrestling business in '73 during the fall and winter of baseball off season. His first wrestling character, the Spider, was similar to Spider-Man. um, he later took the ring, named Randy Savage at the suggestion of his longtime friend and trainer Terry the Goose Steffens, and Georgia Championship Wrestling booker Ole Anderson, who said that the name Poffo did not fit someone who wrestled like a savage. The Macho Man nickname was adopted after his mother Judy Poffo read a Reader's Digest article predicting that the phrase would become the next hot term. Savage eventually decided to end his baseball career and become a full-time wrestler, working with his brother and father. He wrestled his first match against Midwest Territory wrestler Golden Boy Paul Christie. Savage worked with his father and brother in Michigan, the Carolinas, Georgia, the Maritimes, and the Eastern Tennessee Territory run by Nick Gulas. After a while, his father felt that his sons were not getting the pushes they deserved, so he started the Outlaw ICW, which stands for International Championship Wrestling Promotions in the Mid-American states. Eventually, the ICW disbanded, and Randy and Lanny entered the Memphis scene, joining Jerry Lawler's CWA, their former competitors. While there, Savage feuded with Lawler over the AWA Southern Heavyweight Championship. He also teamed with Lanny to battle the Rock and Roll Express. This feud included a match on June 25th, '84 in Memphis, where in the storyline, Savage injured Ricky Morton by pile driving him through the timekeeper's table, leading to the Express winning by disqualification, though Savage's brother Lanny later said that Morton was not injured in the attack. Later in '84, Savage turned babyface and allied with Lawler against Jimmy Hart's First Family Alliance, only to turn heel on Lawler again in early '85 and resume the feud with him all over the title. This ended when Lawler beat Savage in a losers leaves town match on June 7th in Memphis, Tennessee. So with that being said, they were ahead of the time. Macho Man was part of pile driving and using the surrounding areas of the ring, the outside of the ring. When it comes to slamming people on tables and stuff. This is almost 40 years ago. They're doing it still now. In June '85, Savage signed with Vince McMahon, billed as the top free agent in wrestling. Savage's first appearances on Tuesday Night Titans featured several established managers, including Bobby the Brain Heenan, Jimmy Hart, Mr. Fuji, Johnny Valiant, and Classy Freddie Blassie, offering their services as Savage. He eventually declined their offers and chose Miss Elizabeth as his new manager. His gimmick was a crazed egomaniac bully who mistreated Miss Elizabeth and threatened everyone who even looked at her. He made his pay-per-view debut at the Wrestling Classic on November 7th, 85, participating in a 16-man tournament. He defeated Ivan Putski, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and the Dynamite Kid before losing by countout to the finals to Junkyard Dog. And then in '85, he started a feud with then Intercontinental Champion Tito Santana, right? And Santana beat him on October 19th, '85 in San Juan, Puerto Rico. During November 2nd, '85 episode of Saturday Night's Main Event 3, he unsuccessfully challenged Santana for the title. Savage won the match by countout, but not the title because the title did not change hands by countout, right? In a rematch on WWF on NESN on February 8th, '86, he won the WWF Intercontinental Championship at the Boston Garden by using an illegal steel object stashed in his tights to knock out Santana. Early in his WWF career, Savage also won 3 countout victories, the first at the Spectrum in Philly and the other 2 at Madison Square Garden over his future tag team partner, WWF champion Hulk Hogan, although the belt did not change hands due to the countout, as well as engaging feuds with Bruno Sammartino and George Animal Steel. Those are some of the best. I remember back then, and he had the feuds with Santana and then George Animal Steel, when George Animal Steel stole Elizabeth and ran, took off with her and had her. I think he had her hostage for a while. And then the next time they wrestled, if it was SummerSlam I don't remember if it was WrestleMania, but it was the winner gets Elizabeth type thing. And those are some. I was a kid at the time, so everybody bought into that. You know what I mean? Now when you watch it now as a grown up, you're like, damn, that shit was whack. But at the time, it was they Vince McMahon and their creative team over there at WWF was definitely on hit. You know what I mean? I remember him having a feud also with Ultimate Warrior. I believe the Ultimate Warrior took the Intercontinental title from him, if I'm not mistaken. And then Honky Tonk Man was around back then. Ravishing Rick Rude was around back then as champions, as Intercontinental champions. Definitely Macho Man was, like they said, he had Hulk Hogan type drawing power. And at that time, WWF had like a card, a B card, a C card, and a D card. Believe it or not, they were able to travel around and pretty much sell out the houses and have one of those guys on top as the main drawing power on the card, right? So you had Hulk Hogan as the A, you had Randy Savage maybe as the B, maybe Ultimate Warrior. Little later it was Ultimate Warrior as the C, and then the D card might have been Demolition as the lead, as the main event. Or it could have been, Jake the Snake Roberts, or it could have been Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Jimmy Snuka. But they had so much talent there at WWF at this time. I've watched over the years, I've watched documentaries or different little clips and shoot interviews with like Greg Gagne, and he was talking about how literally, AWA had like the hottest talent for a while there, and WWF, Vince McMahon Jr. was just picking them off little by little. You know what I mean? Starting with Hulk Hogan, Nick Bockwinkel later went over there, Larry Hennig, Mr. Perfect. You got Scott Hall. Scott Hall was He had blonde hair back then. He had the big mustache, cowboy. I think what was his name? He's had so many different names. I think it's something cowboy. Um, they took him. They took the Rockers. They took Jim Brunzell went over there and then joined Brian Blair as the Killer Bees. Um, I think even Coco Beware might have been over there too. But I know Coco Beware was Mid South with Junkyard Dog, which was Bill Watts' territory, and then they ended up going to WWF. But he was taking talent from a lot of different territories. But AWA definitely got hit hard by WWF talent wise. But a lot of those men, then he joined Hulk Hogan. They became the Superpowers, and then that's when they had the feud with Elizabeth. That he touched her the way when she got knocked down, he took her to the back. Hulk Hogan to get help. Randy Savage was left in the ring, so he got all mad about that, and the storylines and the heat that was created with Macho Man and a lot of the wrestlers back in the day was like real. It seemed like real heat. You know what I mean? Excuse me. And it was a lot of uh, real life stuff that would happen to real people. Things that real people would get heat off. You know what I'm saying? And heat meaning the heat means the beef basically. You know what I mean? But those are some definitely some some of the greatest, some of the best memories of wrestling back in the time with this guy when Macho Man and Hulk Hogan and the other guy in the profile that I'm gonna do right now, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat was my favorite singles wrestler in WWF. But again, with Ricky the Dragon too, he had a career with different promotions. We'll talk about that when we get there. But uh, Randy Savage ended up leaving WWF sometime in the '90s and joining WCW, which by that time a lot of guys left WWF and went to WCW, such as Hulk Hogan. Ric Flair was always bouncing. Not always bouncing back and forth, but at that time he had left uh, WCW, went to went to WWF, and he came back to WCW. And you had, Ric Flair was back there with the Four Horsemen and Macho Man, Luger, Sting, the Hulkster was there. Um, Junkyard Dog had went over there. Ted DiBiase, Mr. Perfect. Eventually, Bret Hitman Hart went over there. So there was a lot of guys jumping ship from WWF going to WCW, and then eventually, everybody knows the Outsiders went over there. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, formerly known as Diesel and Razor Ramon, and those names were owned by WWF, so they had to leave those names, and eventually they came out as their own names. But both Scott Hall and Kevin Nash have had different gimmicks, different ring names over the years, many different ones. You know what I mean? But Macho Man, just like I said, he's one of the greatest. You know what I'm saying? And the fact that he was a professional baseball player, was actually in the minor leagues under, uh, the farm system for the Cincinnati Reds and the St. Louis Cardinals. Again, I had mentioned I'm going to do a spill on that. He'll be the only baseball player unless I find more from here until then. But majority of the guys were football players. Brock Lesnar, Wahoo McDaniels, Goldberg. Um, there's a couple other ones. And then some guys had great college careers, didn't make it to NFL, but they had great college careers, such as Ron Simmons, Lex Luger, The Rock, Dr. Dusty Williams. Oh, also made professionals were Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff and Butch Reed. Butch Reed played professional football, and so did Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Those are a few more. And so far, the only one I found that played baseball was Randy Savage. So, the heat continued over there in WCW with different angles they had over there, and it just didn't stop. You know what I mean? That's what it's about when it comes to wrestling, is the angles, the heat. You know what I mean? All that. But he's definitely Macho Man is definitely one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, and definitely got to be on the top 10 all time. I would say top 20. I would just say 20 just to with all the different promotions to say that he's there. Um the top 20 all time of wrestlers from the 80s. Even though I want to say he's in the top 10. Because you got to keep in mind there was WWF, there was NWA, which was so many different promotions were under NWA. You had Jim Crockett, you had Georgia Championship Wrestling, you got the wrestling in Florida, Eddie Graham and them. You had WCCW, which is world class. Japan, all those different ones were under uh, NWA. And then you had AWA. They had a lot of talent there as well. And then you had CWA. Jerry the King Lawler. You had guys from Mid South. It's just Stampede. It just goes on and on. So the other profile is he was born Richard Henry Blood Sr. Born on February 28, 1953. Better known by his ring name, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. And we know he's American retired professional wrestler, best known for his work with the AWA, Jim Crockett Promotions, World WCW, and WWF, which is now WWE, right? Um, he's born in West Point, New York, and he's been married a few times. His children is Richie Steamboat, and his brother was Vic Steamboat. I remember him slightly. Some of the ring names he's been known by was Rick Blood, the Dragon, Richard Blood, Ricky Steamboat, Sam Steamboat Jr., 5'10", 235 pounds. He was billed from Honolulu, Hawaii, and also Charlotte, North Carolina, which he did live in North Carolina because when he was wrestling for Jim Crockett, he was living over there. He was trained by Vern Gagne and the Iron Sheik. He debuted in 1976, and he retired November 27, 2022. He just had another match just recently, was Ricky Steamboat's final match. And Jim Crockett in WCW, he was a one-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a four-time United States Heavyweight Champion, a four-time World TV Champion, a 12-time Tag Team Champion, 8 under WCW banner, one time, though unofficial, under the NWA banner, a 3-time champion under the Mid-Atlantic banner, and a 2-time Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion. In WWF, Steamboat was a one-time Intercontinental Heavyweight Champion and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2009. He's of Japanese-American descent. Blood was born in West Point, New York, like I mentioned, and he went to high school in New York and graduated in 1971 from Boca Ciega High School in Gulf Point, Florida, where he was on the school wrestling team. He was a 2-time New York State wrestling qualifier and a Florida State champion. AWA in 1976, Blood debuted in 76 as a babyface under his real name, Rick Blood. That was in AWA. Then he went to Championship Wrestling from Florida. And he made his debut at CWF for Eddie Graham, and he gave him the name Ricky Steamboat based on his resemblance to Hawaiian wrestler Sammy Steamboat. According to Steamboat, Graham thought Rick Blood was a good name for him for a heel, not a babyface. Then he went to Jim Crockett Promotions in 77 through 88, which was first going under Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, and then it changed to Jim Crockett. Let's see. He entered NWA, National Wrestling Alliance sanctioned Jim Crockett Promotions, which ran under the concurrent brand names Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling and Wide World Wrestling, later World Wide Wrestling, as well as airing syndicate TV programs under those respective names, where he would remain for the next 8 years of his career. Steamboat, who had been brought in by JCP Booker George Scott on the recommendation of Wahoo McDaniel, was initially billed as a babyface protege of Wahoo and barely spoke above whisper in interviews. Matching him with his brash young counterpart Ric Flair was a natural fit. Steamboat was doing an interview on the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling when Flair, then Mid-Atlantic television champion, began goading him Steamboat knocked Flair out with a backhand chop to set up a match between the two. Steamboat's star-making performance came when he pinned Flair as after a double thrust off the top rope to win the NWA Mid-Atlantic Television Championship at the WRAL TV studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Over the next 8 years in JCP, Steamboat captured the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship 3 times and the NWA World Tag Team Championship 6 times, once with Paul Jones and 5 times with Jay Youngblood. And I also heard him say during his last match, which was just last week, the guy asked him like what was his favorite matches, and he says, well, everybody talks about the Flair matches. He goes, but he had a real good time tag teaming with Youngblood, and he said, because he was a singles wrestler before that, but he just said he just appreciated he just appreciated things more as a tag team, and it just like lit another spark under him, basically. He also won the TV title, which at that point had been renamed NWA World Television Championship a second time. Notable moments involving Steamboat's time in Mid-Atlantic territory include the day Flair dragged his face around the television studio, causing facial scarring, and Steamboat retaliating the following week by ripping Flair's expensive suit to shreds, an angle that would be reworked several times, involving other wrestlers in the years that followed. When longtime tag team partner Jones turned heel on Steamboat at the end of a 2-ring battle royal, Steamboat and Youngblood painting yellow streaks down the backs of Paul Jones and Baron von Raschke in order to embarrass them into defending the World Tag Team titles against the two. Steamboat and Youngblood's top drawing feud with Sergeant Slaughter and Don Carnugel. Steamboat and Youngblood being turned on by their friends Jack and Jerry Briscoe. Steamboat in a shocking and emotional feud against former mentor Wahoo McDaniel, and his last great series in the territory, feuding with Tully Blanchard over the NWA TV title. After having creative differences with JCP Booker, Dusty Rhodes, Steamboat left NWA, and then he landed in WWF 85 to 88, birthed the Dragon, and this is during the time that he was my favorite singles wrestler in WWF, second being Jimmy Snuka. 85, Steamboat was offered a contract by Vince McMahon, and he joined the WWF shortly after his debut, where he defeated Steve Lombardi on Championship Wrestling. If everybody don't know, Steve Lombardi is the Brooklyn Brawler, and he was with the WWF company for 3 decades plus, I want to say. If you guys haven't seen, I suggest you guys go to Hannibal TV and go watch Steve Lombardi's shoot interviews. You're talking about a guy, even though he wasn't a superstar, this guy was around 30 plus years. You know what I'm saying? And he has a lot of stories. Steamboat was given the gimmick of a babyface nicknamed the Dragon. Steamboat's jacket and trunks attire was replaced by a kikogi, and long tights. Steamboat's mother is Japanese American, hence his Asian features, which were crucial for the Dragon gimmick. Steamboat kept the nickname and gimmick for the remainder of his career. He appeared at an inaugural WrestleMania where he defeated Matt Bourne in the third match on the card. Matt Bourne is another guy who, he wasn't a huge figure, nothing like that, but he had great in-ring chemistry. How do you say that? Great in-ring. He was a good performer. He was a good wrestler, but his in-ring, like, what's that word they use? Basically, like his in-ring. Oh man, I can't even think of the word. But anyways, he was also known as Doink the Clown, the original Doink the Clown. That was Matt Bourne. And on September 14, 85 edition of Championship Wrestling, Steamboat defeated Mr. Fuji, but after his victory, he was attacked by Fuji's protege, Don Morocco. Don Morocco was another one of my favorites, especially when he came back in the late 80s. I think it was the late 80s. And he pitted Steamboat in a feud against Morocco and Fuji during a televised episode of WWF Championship Wrestling. Steamboat and Morocco were scheduled for a match that never officially started after Morocco jumped Steamboat before the bell. Following the beatdown, Morocco and Fiji then used Steamboat's karate black belt to hang him outside the ring from the top rope before Steamboat was finally saved by Tito Santana and the Junkyard Dog. On November 2nd, Saturday night's main event 3, he defeated Fuji in a Kung Fu challenge. um, on January 4th, 86, Saturday night's main event 4, his intense feud with Morocco ended after he and the JYD Junkyard Dog beat Morocco and Fuji in a tag team match. In the opening round at the WWF The Wrestling Classic, Steamboat faced Davey Boy Smith in a rare match, pitting two fan favorites against each other. The match moved back and forth until Smith landed in the ropes trying to attack Steamboat, but Steamboat sidestepped and Smith injured his groin and was unable to continue. So Steamboat was awarded the match by forfeit. And then he faced Randy Savage in the quarterfinals. The referee was distracted by Miss Elizabeth as Savage took advantage and pulled out brass knuckles from his tights and hit Steamboat before pinning him to win the match. So he's, again, Jake the Snake. Jake the Snake. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, when he becomes the Intercontinental Champion, it's been said over the years that the WWF had, we're going to push him pretty big, Who knows what that meant? I don't know if he would have became the heavyweight champion because Hulk Hogan was still big in his prime, right? Those Hulk Hogan years, 84, I think it's 84 he won it, or 85, all the way up until 90, 91, 92, he still was around. Even though Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage were champions, the belt was still going back and forth a few times, with The Undertaker as well, Yokozuna, different guys were winning the title, but Hulk Hogan was still relevant. Sid Vicious, or Sid Justice, wherever he was going by then. So when Ricky Dragon was married at the time, and I think he had a son, he asked for some time off, and that just didn't sit well with Vince McMahon because, like I said, they were about ready to give him a huge push, and he wasn't there to answer the call. You know what I mean? So that didn't sit well with Vince McMahon and them, and then eventually he leaves again. He leaves WWF, takes a break for a while, and then he pops back up in WCW. Let's see. November 22nd, 86 edition of Superstars. Steamboat got a shot at the Intercontinental Championship against Macho Man. Steamboat lost the match by countout, but after the match, Savage continued to assault him and injured Steamboat's larynx, kayfabe, with the ring bell, beginning an angle between the two. On January 3rd, 87, Saturday night's main event, Steamboat returned from his injury and prevented Savage from attacking George the Animal Steel like he had done to Steamboat 6 weeks prior at WrestleMania 3. So this is the big WrestleMania 3 at the Pontiac Silverdome in Detroit, Michigan, where Hulk Hogan was the main event with Macho Man, or with Andre the Giant, excuse me. And that's when Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and Macho Man, they wrestled for the Intercontinental Championship. So the decision was made by WWF management to punish Steamboat by having him initially drop the title to Butch Reed. But Butch Reed did not show up that night, so he dropped it to the Honky Tonk Man. And then the Honky Tonk Man is known to have held the belt for like one of the longest reigns as Intercontinental Champion in WWF history. Just so everybody knows, Pat Patterson was the first Intercontinental Champion of WWF sometime in the 70s. I think it was 73, maybe. Yeah, I believe it was 73, 77. It was sometime in the 70s. Let's see. Honky Tonk Man on June 13th episode of Superstars. So yeah, even Butch Reed messed up too by not showing up because he was going to be the Intercontinental Champion. His son was born. So Ricky Steamboat's son, like I mentioned earlier, was born a month later. Steamboat came back in time for the Survivor Series in November of 87. But WWF management was still bitter over his sabotage, basically from his first WWF run, however, and he was not pushed or given any meaningful feuds. Steamboat himself has implied in interviews that he was being pushed for one upping the Hogan Andre the Giant main event at WrestleMania 3 after defeating Ravishing Rick Rude by DQ at the '88 Royal Rumble. Steamboat was entered into the tournament for the vacant WWF Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania in March of '88. On WF television prior to the match, Steamboat uh, appeared where he stated that he hoped Randy Savage would win his first round match, thus setting up a rematch of last year's WrestleMania match and one more classic confrontation. However, Steamboat would lose his first round opponent, Greg the Hammer Valentine. Although television segments were shot immediately after WrestleMania that made it appear that Steamboat would be facing Valentine in a series of matches, Steamboat left WWF shortly thereafter. And then he goes back to WCW in '89, right? And he made his comeback to wrestling in January of '89 and returned to NWA, specifically NWA affiliate World Championship Wrestling on January 21st, 1989 edition of World Championship Wrestling. It would later become the name of the promotion as a surprise tag team partner of Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert against NWA World Champions Ric Flair and Barry Windham in a tag team match that saw Steamboat pin Flair. This earned him a shot at the title at Chi-Town Rumble, where Steamboat defeated Flair in the main event for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. He was also the last NWA World Champion to defend the belt in All Japan Pro Wrestling in a match against Tiger Mask 2. After Steamboat retained the NWA title against Flair in a controversial ending on the April 2nd Clash of the Champions, Raging Cajun, Flair, and Steamboat would then face each other in their final rematch at Wrestle War in May, where Steamboat dropped the title to Flair. All three of Steamboat's matches with Flair were given 5 or more stars by Pro Wrestling Observer newsletter publisher Dave Meltzer. After losing the title, Steamboat remained the number one contender to the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, a fact that irked fellow babyface U.S. champion Lex Luger. This despite culminated in Luger attacking Steamboat on the June 14th Clash of Champions Guts and Glory. Thus turning heel, Luger stood over the fallen Steamboat and arrogantly said, "There lies your number one contender." Steamboat then demanded a no disqualification match against Luger at the Great American Bash for the title. But just before the bell, Luger demanded the clause be dropped or there would be no match. Steamboat lost the match by disqualification after hitting Luger with a chair. Due to a contract dispute, this would be Steamboat's last match of note in WCW in '89. And then he would go on to go to North American Wrestling Association, and then New Japan '90, and then return to WWF in '91, and then he came back to WCW from '91 to '94, winning World Tag Team Champions. He was tag team champions in WCW with Dustin Rhodes, Dusty Rhodes' son. In those matches with Ric Flair, like Ric Flair always, and it's not just Ric Flair, it's a lot of people that are involved in wrestling. Like those were some of the best matches they've seen. You know, Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. They're good friends to this day. Ric Flair had his last match in July, and now Ricky Steamboat just did his in January, just last week. I think it was last week. I think it was the weekend after Thanksgiving. You know what I mean? But Ricky the Dragon at that time too, he like I had mentioned earlier, because of his Asian roots from his mother's side. He was called the Dragon in WWF, and during that time, that was all, it was post Bruce Lee, but it was, Van Damme. It was, all the martial art movies we were into as kids. And I think that was the reason why, I liked him a lot. You know what I mean? He was my favorite. It was that karate look, plus he was Asian, right? Half Japanese. And, that karate look, the dragon, he wore the headband. The Karate Kid, that was Karate Kid time. Mr. Miyagi, like I said, Van Damme movies, uh, American Ninja, it was all kinds of Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes from G.I. Joe. It was all around that same time. So he was my favorite, like I said, wrestler at that time. But those are just a couple profiles of the '80s wrestlers that really stick out to me when I think about pro wrestling. Um, I'm trying to be fair because unlike basketball, there's just the NBA. Unlike baseball, it's just the Major League Baseball, MLB. When it comes to football, it's the NFL. Boxing is boxing. But then when it comes to these things, wrestling, you got all the different promotions. You know what I'm saying? So with that said, Big Lou's gonna tap on out. What it do, Big Lou, and MCR2.